Hello, my loves, and welcome to another episode of Fluffenhammer Adjacent. There are rumblings. There are lots and lots of rumblings happening at the moment in Games Workshop with regards to our favourite faction, of course, the Chaos stuff, which is now a very broad church, right? It's not just... there was a time when I first started the hobby when Chaos was just Chaos. It was all lumped together in one big book, like cultists, demons... Chaos Space Marines, everything. It was just one big book with like tertiary army lists, almost like Get You By army lists, which were pretty good. They were not bad, the second ed Chaos, Demon World and Cultist army lists. They were alright, they were pretty cool. And then there was that weird period in third ed where everything just focused down on Chaos Space Marines and everything else went away. You had like tertiary demons who could be summoned as support, and then that was it. That was all demons were back then. Then they started to branch out again, but they did it in the wrong way with the fourth ed Chaos Space Marine Codex, where they just totally separated Chaos Demons from Chaos Space Marines and had demons operating in their own weird vacuum, which just never worked. It just never worked. They didn't put enough time or effort into it. Not in 40k they didn't, because the demons have always had a problem in 40k. In the fantasy battle setting, in both fantasy battle and Age of Sigmar, it's much easier. It's much easier for demons to function because they are primarily skirmish, assault-oriented games anyway. There's much less in the way of like big ordnance flying around. There's not like dedicated firepower phases and entire armies dedicated to long-range firepower like there are in 40k, right? Demons have always, not universally but characteristically, always been almost exclusively assault. They rely largely on psychic powers for their long-range attacks, and then you get the odd exception that proves the rule, like Pink Horrors, Flamers, mostly the Zeech stuff, let's be honest, and later on Soul Grinders and whatnot, but they really are not much to speak of, to be perfectly honest. They are get you by. They give you some fire support, and that's it. The vast majority of the army is assault-based, and as a result, the demons really struggle in 40k as a standalone army. For the most part, the vast majority of people use them as an ally system. They are there to be summoned by Chaos Space Marines or by Chaos Knights as support units, right? So you can get a sort of soup thing going on. They have always had a bit of a problem, and at the moment there is absolutely no sign or indication of the demons coming in 9th ed. They will, we know they will, and we know that there's already a plan for them, because there's no rules or summoning rules for them in any of the Chaos Space Marine books. Not in Thousand Suns, not in Death Guard, not in Chaos Space Marines. There's no allies system. Insofar as we're aware, maybe the Chaos Space Marines book will have a little bit more, but I imagine, rather than just like repeating the same rules in myriad different books, what they've decided to do is put the ally and summoning rules in the Chaos Demons book, which I imagine is probably going to be the last one for 9th ed, certainly of the established armies. We may even get, there's obviously we've had the reference to the new squats, the Leagues of Votann, and it looks like there's already more work and more rumours about them than there are about Chaos Demons, but they've got to be there. Chaos Demons have been a dedicated army for a long time now, and they are a significant part of the background, of the fluff, and also of other armies, like your Chaos Space Marines, your Thousand Suns, etc. They've got to be there, they've got to be part of it. How they will function, I don't know. It's all up in the air at the moment. My guess is that they will have a similar allies system to what exists in the Eldari Codex between Harlequins, Corsairs, Eldari and Drukhari. So what you'll be able to do is include certain types of demons in Thousand Sun, Death Guard and Chaos Space Marine armies without undermining their army-wide special rules. That's certainly how it should be. They should be a little bit more integrated, to be honest, certainly with the cult legions. Like, for example, Thousand Suns have always been depicted fighting alongside Zeech and demons. That's just part of what they are. They rely on Zeech and demons to make up their numbers and to fill certain gaps in their army, because, of course, they are a very specific, a very refined army in terms of what they do. So I'm imagining there's going to be I'm hoping, anyway, there's going to be a little bit more integration there where they play together really well. I would certainly hope for some degree of cross-pollination where they're not just separate from one another, where they do have some common special rules where they can benefit one another. That would be great. Same goes for Nurgle demons and the Death Guard, and when we get it, Khorne demons and the World Eaters. That is definitely something that is massively consistent in the rumours thus far, both with regards to the up-and-coming Chaos Space Marines Codex, which we know is coming from Adepticon because of all the new lovely models that we saw glimpses of, and also from the rumour mongers out there on the internet. Almost all of the rumour mongers, certainly the ones who are the most reliable, have said the same thing, which is World Eaters and Khorne units like your Berserkers and whatnot are not in the up-and-coming Chaos Space Marine Codex, because they are relatively soon to get their own codex. And if that's the case, if that does prove true, which it looks like it probably is, then there's certain things we can expect. If we're getting a World Eaters codex, then that means Angron is incoming, the next Demon Primarch, Angron of the World Eaters. That's going to be very interesting. That is going to be very interesting, because like the demons, the World Eaters are going to need a lot of new stuff to make them function. They're going to need a lot of special rules and a lot of new units to make them function, because again, they are primarily a close combat oriented army. Not exclusively, they are still Space Marines, so they still have certain support units. And Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows, so he's quite happy to have your demon engines and your long range firepower. He loves war in general, so he doesn't really care. He just tends to prefer close combat, as do the World Eaters. So I'm imagining there will be some new units to accommodate that, or at the very least some new special rules, some units carried over from Chaos Space Marines, as there are in the Thousand Suns Codex. That would be my guess. But it's going to be very interesting to see how these things pan out down the line. I mean, with the Leagues of Votann being announced, basically the squats come back. One of the least likely armies I would have expected Games Workshop to come back with, outside of the Eldari Exodites. Nothing is off the cards now. Absolutely nothing is off the cards. Where we go from here, I don't know, but I love the fact that they are doing this. I love the fact that they are introducing old armies and sort of recapitulating them a little bit to make them new, to make them more interesting, to make them more fitting with the current setting, and so on and so forth. And that's certainly what they've done with the Leagues of Votann. They look very interesting indeed. There's a lot of rife speculation on what they might do with them. I mean, one of the most interesting things about the Leagues of Votann for me is something that they maybe should have done in the background, and maybe in the game a long time ago, which is they present a differing human ideology from the Imperium of Man. I mean, I know the Imperium of Man is vast and it has various different sort of conflicting ideologies operating within it. I mean, you've got the Ecclesiarchy, you've got the Sisters of Battle, the Adeptus Sororitas, in conflict with the likes of the Space Marine legions, most of whom don't worship the Emperor as a god. You've got, like, even within the Space Marine legions, you've got the Black Templars who do worship the Emperor of Mankind as a god, in conflict with the likes of the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, and the Ultramarines who do not, right? You've got the Inquisition, who are basically in conflict with everyone as and when they see fit. Even within the Inquisition, you've got different ordos that conflict with one another, and different individual inquisitors whose ideologies and agendas conflict with one another. It's all very, for the most part, there is a cohering ideology. Certainly in very broad strokes, there is a cohering ideology within the Imperium of Man, which is ultimately fascist, right? It's a theological fascism, which is totally tyrannical and intolerant, and it thinks nothing of massacring entire civilizations. If it feels that there might even be a hint of deviation of any kind, whether it be ideological, genetic, physical, it is like the darkest possible manifestation of extreme right-wing ideology, yeah? That's all there's ever been. amongst human beings in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, barring one or two very niche examples of cultures outside of that, and most of them tend to be demonized as bad guys. You get the certain knightly cultures, for example, amongst the Chaos Knights, the Renegade Knights, who are totally separate from the Imperium, but tend to fall to chaos. That's the dichotomy that you've really had thus far. The answer is fascism, effectively. Fascism is necessary in this universe, but that's not true anymore. What I love about the introduction of the Leagues of Votann is that they demonstrate that that's not true anymore. The Leagues of Votann are human. They are a sort of deviation of humanity, or a different morphology of humanity, but they're still human. But they do not believe the same things that the Imperium believes. They're an entirely other culture. They're an entirely separate culture. So suddenly you have this alternative, and it looks like, whatever problems they have innate to their cultures, which they probably will because it's the Warhammer 40,000 universe, that's just the way it is, they represent an alternative. They represent the fact that actually there are other ways human beings can exist out there, outside of this fascistic oppression. You've got a similar thing happening in Eldari society, where the craft worlds, they're not as fascistic as the Imperium is, but they are very conservative and very prescriptive. You have the notion of the Eldari path, for example, which is imposed. That's enshrined within Eldari culture. They ensure that young Eldari follow that path, and that they maintain some degree of obsessive observance in the paths that they follow, as a means of keeping their souls from deviation and from chaos. But they're unlike the fascism of the Imperium. They do allow for deviation. So if a young Eldari wants to deviate from the path, or wants to leave the path entirely, there's space for them to do that. They go off and become rangers or corsairs or whatever, and they are not demonized by their parent craft world. They don't become exiles as such. They're still allowed back. They still fight alongside their craft world. In fact, the craft world cultures have made space for that, so that the Rangers, the Corsairs and whatnot serve a very specific function within the highly prescriptive nature of the craft worlds, right? It's a way that the Eldari, even though they are well aware of the threat of chaos, they're more well aware than the Imperium is, than humanity is, they still allow for more lassitude. The reins are not as tight, it is not as tyrannical, and certainly not in the same way that the Imperium is. Like, the Eldari craft worlds would never do what the Imperium does, because every Eldari life is sacred, right? Insofar as the Eldari are concerned. They would never, for example, mutilate their kin in the same way that humanity does. In human civilizations, you have lobotomy that's basically standard. You have the entire classes of human beings who are mutilated and transformed into servitors to fulfill their specific functions, right? And then they just die when it's convenient. That would never happen on an Eldari craft world. They consider the lives of Eldari to be sacred, and they regard the cultivation of those lives to their highest possible point within any given path to be absolute and necessary. So they would never consider that. They would never even think of doing that. Even things like that the Imperium wouldn't blink an eye if they could do it. They wouldn't blink their eyes to do so. Things like the Wraith Guard and the Wraith Lords, the undead units, if you like, they are regarded with absolute horror by the Eldari because they are products of necessity. They are basically the spirits of dead Eldari funneled into technological constructs. It's regarded by the Eldari as a kind of necromancy, and it's very sort of taboo and an unpleasant thing to do. But they do it out of necessity. But even that is treated with a degree of reverence, and it's not as perfunctory or as fascistic in its nature as what the imperial equivalent would be, right? It's interesting that now we have the Leagues of Votann, and it's going to be very fascinating to see how they write them, how they draw them. My sincere hope is that they do present this alternative to the Imperium of mankind, that there is this kind of ideological friction. So, for example, I mean, we've already had suggestions that that's the case. In the reveal, the text says that they do not regard their technology in the same way that the Imperium does, for example. You know how the Imperium regards its technology with a kind of medieval ignorance, a kind of enshrined superstition. So technology is essentially magic and occultism to the Imperium. It's a matter of superstition. The Leagues of Votan do not regard it that way. They regard it as what it is: instruments, tools, technology for their own betterment and convenience, yeah? So that is already a profound ideological difference that will bring them into conflict with the likes of the Adeptus Mechanicus, for example. I can see the Leagues of Votan and the Adeptus Mechanicus having a very uneasy relationship indeed, because I would guess, it's not absolute, but I would guess that the Leagues of Votan have no problem with adapting their technology, with improving it, with making alterations to STC constructs. That's a tautology because it's standard template constructs, but STCs, to doing with their technology what would be considered to be blasphemy to the Adeptus Mechanicum and the vast majority of the Imperium. That's already going to bring them into conflict. I also imagine that they definitely do not follow like the religious ideologies of the Imperium. There's no way they're going to regard the Emperor as a god, for example. They probably don't even worship the Emperor, you know? They might revere him in another way, you know, as maybe some cultures did back in the Great Crusade, you know, as not as a god, but as a kind of, I don't know, saintly figure, as a secular saint, you know, someone who perhaps paved the way for other things for humanity. Who knows? Who knows at this point? It's all speculation, right? But it's very, very, very interesting. We also have, of course, the new Chaos Space Marines Codex imminent, and when that comes out, expect another Ages of Chaos, definitely. That's going to be very interesting too. That's going to be very interesting because they've held off for the first time in a very long time, for like several editions. They've held off with the Chaos Space Marines until late on in the day, which is brilliant. That is the best thing ever, because that means they've paid attention. That means that they've actually put some thought and consideration into them. It means that they're not dropping right at the beginning like the poor old Necrons did, and they are not the test bed for what comes after. Chaos Space Marines have suffered with that for the last 3 or 4 editions, and it really did start to grate after a while, to be honest, because the Chaos Space Marines deserve as much love as their Imperial counterparts. They are the big bad guys, right? They deserve to be the antagonists, the arch antagonists of this universe. So they deserve as much love as their Imperial counterparts, and they always have, but they very, very rarely got it. If the Thousand Sons and Death Guard are anything to go by, then yeah, this should be a really good codex, because both of those codices are wonderful. They're really, really good pieces of work. And people are still only just discovering like little things, certainly with the Thousand Sons codex, little naughty tricks you can pull with that codex that make it really, really interesting. We've already had what seem to be massive leaks for the Chaos Space Marines codex. If you head on over to the Bolter and Chainsword forums, for example, there's a guy on there, Clockwork Chris, I believe his name is, who has put loads of leaks up, which may or may not turn out to be correct. I mean, they may, it's entirely likely that they'll change before the final codex hits, but what we've seen is really interesting. Really interesting. If these rumours are correct, then it looks like all of the Chaos Space Marine legions, the established legions, have had a massive glow up. They have traits and doctrines in the same way that Imperial Marines do, which is good. That makes sense. Corrupted doctrines makes absolute sense for the Chaos Space Marines, because they're still Space Marines. In fact, in a weird way, they're more Space Marine than Space Marine. A lot of these guys are the original Space Marines. They're the guys from 10,000 years ago, right? When the Space Marines were originally forged. So they're more Space Marine than the current crop of Imperial Loyalist Space Marines, who are kind of like they're almost like a degenerate generation of Space Marines, if you like. It's one of the problems that Robert Guilliman has, obviously. He is from the era of the Great Crusade and before. So he has friction with the way the Space Marines have become in the Warhammer 40,000 universe's present day. They are not the same as they used to be. They've become very, very different over the last 10,000 years, as one would expect. The Chaos Space Marines have become different as well, but there are a lot of them still around. A lot of those original Marines are still around. You know, there's Abaddon, the special characters, obviously. Abaddon, Typhus, Ahriman, Khan, Fabius, Lucius, all those guys are still around, as are some of the lesser characters as well. So yeah, it makes sense for them to operate like Space Marines do, but in a corrupted fashion. And that's really fascinating. It looks like, from what we've seen, the Iron Warriors and the Word Bearers are going to be really bloody good when they hit the tabletop, which makes sense, especially for the Word Bearers. The Word Bearers were the original Chaos Space Marines, right? They were the first ones to actively fall to Chaos. So they deserve a little bit more. They definitely deserve a wee bit of a glow up. They're also one of the very few whose Primarchs is still alive. Lorgar is still around as a demon Primarch. He is still around, so there's no reason why they should not get a little bit of a glow up, you know. Black Legion, obviously the Black Legion are the prime Chaos Space Marine Legion. They're Abaddon's own legion, so they also deserve to be at least the equivalents of the Ultramarines, right? And it looks like they've got some very, 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 very cool special rules to represent that. Abaddon, the rumoured rules we've got for him, he's a Primarch killer. He looks like he could take down small knights on his own in a single turn of close combat, so which makes sense. You know, he is at least on... He's not on Demon Primarch levels of power at the moment, but he's certainly on, like... on standard, you know, mortal, whatever that means for the Primarchs, but like non-demon Primarch levels of power at this point. After 10,000 years of gaining the blessings of chaos and whatnot, yeah, he should be at least the equivalent of Horus, you know? Not Horus at the end of the Horus Heresy, you know, when he was swelled with the power of the gods or anything, but certainly sort of midway through the heresy. That's for damn sure. That's for damn sure. He should definitely be able to stand up to Robate. There should be good, you know, a good fight between those two, especially considering that they designed the miniatures so when you put them together they look like a diorama, right? That should definitely be the case. He's essentially Horus reborn, isn't he? You know, a bit smarter than Horus, it seems, though. Certainly got his head screwed on a little bit more than Horus does. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting. From what we've seen, the next few months for Games Workshop should be really, really interesting. There's a lot coming down the pipeline that seems designed to shake things up a little bit, and that's grand. That's really, really cool. We always like to see that. Let's hope the Age of Sigmar gets a little bit more of the same treatment, right? Because we haven't had that really since the Broken Realms. We could really do with something to drop into that pond and send ripples out a little bit, yeah? Because it does seem to be suffering a little bit at the moment in comparison to 40k. Not in terms of the army books or anything. The army books are great. The new battle tomes are fantastic. All of them have been really, really good. But after the Broken Realms, it seems that the ripples have stopped, and it's become a little bit more placid again, which is always death for the fantasy setting. That's what spelled the death of the of fantasy battle itself, right? Age of Sigmar has always defined itself by its dynamism. That's what's kept it. That's what's maintained its intrigue, yeah? The fact that the mortal realms change and shift and that they can actually be altered by events. The dynamic of that setting can actually change, and entire armies can be upended or inverted by that. So, let's hope there's something down the pipeline.